everybody, how's it going? Welcome to Mr. Bean Draws Fantasy Art. I think that's the name of this, Mr. Bean. I'm Fabrizio Aiello, welcome. And I am picking up where I left off yesterday. So I'm currently working on just a fantasy illustration. So this is the original. So this is these are the pencils, and then what I do is I scan this in, and then I print them out on Blue Line, which is essentially just using the blue channel. And then when I ink over it and I scan this back in, I can pull out that blue, so it's just the clean inks on that. So that's what I'll be working on today. This is what I did yesterday for about 45 minutes to an hour. Got pretty far. I mean, relatively speaking. So I'll be jumping on that. Hey Blake, how's it going? Long time no see. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a good holiday. Yeah, so I'm probably just gonna jump right in. Oh, before that, might as well. If you're new to me or the channel, I have a comic book, Horace H. Hoover, Occult Detective, sort of set in the 1920s. It's a 5-issue mini-series. The first 3 issues are available at HoraceHoover.com, and there is a collected version currently at Amazon.com. So just search for Horace Hoover, and that should come up. It's sort of got like an old school look and feel, Bronze Age stuff with even some fake ads and a letters page that continues the story. So check it out. Alrighty, so this is where I'm at currently. If I can open up my ink bottle. This is the second day I've used these nibs. Sometimes they don't clean very well, so the second day is sort of telling on whether or not you'll be able to use it or not. A lot, but we'll see what happens. Yikes, sorry about that. I don't do this on my drafting table, I do this on my computer desk. So I have to essentially temporarily convert my computer desk into like a little drafting table every time I do this. So it gets a little dicey sometimes. Alrighty, so I got quite a bit of the left side kind of started. Some form, some shadow, you know. So I'm going to, the traditional thing for me at least, and I think most people, is start someplace that is inconsequential, or we'll say less consequential than, we'll say, an eyeball or a face or something, just because you want to test out your tool, make sure it's working okay, there's not any issues, and you also kind of want to warm up a little bit. Some people actually warm up and they'll do sketches, but I usually just jump right into it. Now, I discussed yesterday that some of the sort of internal rules I'll be using for this particular drawing, I'm not going to do any cross-hatching, so it's just going to be hatching. Am I off the screen? No. So this is just going to be hatching, which will give it a distinct look. And especially for something like a monster or a troll, yeah, this is kind of not doing great, honestly. keep getting these gaps in my lines. I'll give it another whirl. If not, I'll just grab another. I'll grab another nib. Sometimes it's just the soap. When you clean them, there's a little bit of residue. Sometimes, again, it's the actual nib. You know, you have these two pieces of metal that essentially split, and that allows for the ink flow. But if that gets sort of not offset, but if one side gets a little more pressure than the other, they don't come together in this sort of perfect point, you can get some weird artifacting and not predictable results. So I think that fixed it though. There is nothing more attractive than a troll foot. It's impossible not to look at subject matter and just let your mind wander, because, you know, I'm looking at this troll foot and he has toenails that are, I mean, they're short, right? But surely this troll isn't clipping his nails or going to a salon and getting a pedicure, a giant troll pedicure place, whatever they're called. So then you have to start thinking mechanically, or practically, I should say. Okay, well, he's obviously not cutting his nails, so, all right, well, he's growing them, and then they just break off. Okay, so if they break off, what's the shape of a broken off toenail? And that kind of thinking is just basically what you do as an artist most of the time. You're really thinking through the mechanics of something and then trying to describe that, assuming you're not working from a photograph or something all the time. But you've got to think about that stuff, because if not, you can't have random elements of a drawing for the entire thing. Certain things you can, but there has to be a certain level of realism, regardless if it's a troll or if it's sort of a sci-fi environment. But it's not like you have anything else to think about while you're actually doing the pen and inks. So just kind of let your mind wander, and as you come across certain parts of the drawing, you kind of like problem solve or think through the history and the mechanics of something, and then that gives you just a little more information on how to draw it. Or I could be the only person that does. I know I'm not, but... And to some people that sounds, I don't know, maybe tedious or boring, or it's not fun because it's the, we'll say, academic side of drawing. But without that academic side, you're just going to get you're going to run into quite a bit of frustration, because you're going to hit a part of the drawing and you're not going to know what to draw. And again, sometimes you can get away with that by essentially doing random patterns of things, and sometimes that'll get you through it. I mean, for some artists that works better than I would like, and sometimes it's only artists that can see those problems. So we'll see the anatomy issues, we'll see the perspective problems, we'll see all of that stuff, but a lot of people won't notice it, and to them it's a cool drawing. It doesn't make a difference if that's not the way the arm muscle works, or clothing drapes or something like that. So there's a fair amount of suspension of disbelief in this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously we're dealing with fantasy in this particular scenario, but it doesn't have to be relegated to fantasy. It can be some other genre. We still sort of give a benefit of the doubt. You can take apart so many drawings that look good and are cool, and they capture a particular moment, or they're evocative and people love them. But if you really dug down to, wow, that armor really wouldn't bend at the joint or something, you can really get down to the nitty-gritty for that kind of stuff and find fault with anything. And I do mean anything outside of a John Singer Sargent painting. You can find fault with some of the masters' anatomy, because that was an ongoing exploration into anatomy and all that kind of stuff. There are times when I've seen things, and I mean, I'm not talking about Da Vinci or Michelangelo, but other Renaissance artists, and there's definitely, we'll say, exaggeration is a nice way to put it for certain parts of the anatomy. So is it technically wrong? Yeah, it's exaggerated, but it's also, it's evocative, and there's certain things that just look better. So you might stretch out an arm or a leg, or make the head smaller. A good example of that is the Pietà by Michelangelo. If Mary stood up, I can't remember the exact height, but she would be something like 11 feet tall, if she actually stood up. But it doesn't really make a difference, because it works as a sculpture. I do have to keep remembering this is a troll, so there's going to be scars and warts and, random things all over the skin. So, going to make sure I don't make it too clean. So this area here under the armpit, the direction of the stroke sort of depends on a few different things. I would say primarily it's just the actual form, but you can go horizontally or diagonally or vertically. So that's a constant question or problem you need to solve, is the direction of the stroke, even if it's just hatching. So I could have gone horizontally, and you can go horizontally and it still be with the form, but the light is coming from the top left. So if you can align your hatching with the direction of the shadow, I think that's a good rule of thumb. I'm not saying that's always going to work, but in this particular scenario, that's kind of what I'm going with. And this is going to go pretty dark, so these first chunks of hatching will be hidden eventually, but so I'll just keep building up this area over and over. At this point, it'll kind of resemble like a dot matrix printer or something like that. But then as I build this up, I'll keep this side darker, and it'll slowly have a gradient, and that gradient will describe the form. So there's a lot of wet ink there, so I'm going to move elsewhere, because if not, it'll act kind of obnoxious. So you really need to do it in layers. I probably went a little too far, too quick, but it's fine. And the way to push this knee forward really is by making whatever's behind that knee pretty dark, which is easy. Anytime you can do that, it's almost like it's just as close to cheating as you can get. You want to push something forward, just make whatever's next to it dark. If you're doing a portrait and you have half of the face in light and you want to push it forward, just literally make that background, half of that portrait background dark, and it'll make it three-dimensional. John's Long Box, how's it going? I was just listening to the Perfect 10 from this morning, but I didn't get a chance to finish it. Looked cool though. Shoot. I'm gonna work on the right side a little bit. It's December 1st. This means I listened to my Vince Garibaldi album over and over. It is so good. I don't think it gets the credit it deserves. And, you know, I didn't really like jazz as a kid, but whenever it's like you need to re-listen to it later on, and then something just kind of clicks. And that album is so good. But I'm the same way. As soon as Thanksgiving's over, it's Snoopy and Charlie Brown. And honestly, I was never a fan of Peanuts as a kid. And I've grown to appreciate it a bit more. Hey Marcus, how's it going? It's my favorite Christmas home. Yeah, it's probably my favorite. I mean, now this may be controversial, but I also love the Elvis Christmas album. I was also never an Elvis fan, and then I remember one year I was somewhere, it could have been like Walmart or Target, but they had a bin of CDs. And I was just in a good mood. It was Christmas. I'm like, oh, look, it's the Elvis Christmas album. This is going to be hilarious, I thought. I brought it home, and I love that album. There's a couple of really, really fun songs. I know that Blue Velvet gets overplayed, but I'm okay with that. So this is interesting or not, is underneath the arm here, you can see when I was drawing it that I was drawing the direction of the shadow horizontally, and I'm actually making it vertical. I hope that was still on there. I told an apprentice at work that I was going to have comic strip on my next issue like Peanuts. He had no idea what I was talking about. Oh my god. Never heard of comic strips or even Peanuts. That's classic. I was at something called Pulp Fest over the summer. It's a very small convention, and as you can imagine, it's highly focused to pulp magazines and things like that. So they do have a few comics, but not much. It's mostly pulp stuff. And there was an art dealer there who was selling essentially original comic strips, which I had never seen. Out of all my times looking for art, and I've seen, comic book art that I own, et cetera, but I've never seen comic strips, like the original comic strips. They were so cool. I really wanted to buy a few. They didn't have any, like, really famous ones that, like Prince Valiant or something by somebody that I would know. But they were still really cool because they were in the original format. So these really long strips, which I thought would be really fun to put on your wall. Just these really blown up comic strips. So next time I go to Pulp Fest, I'm going to make it a point to kind of dig through there a little more diligently and see if I can find something, because that would be just very cool. John, the union has stopped hiring the undocumented. Oh, you have to get the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society Very Scary Christmas CDs. 2 CDs of Christmas songs rewritten. I didn't know they did that. I do love the Historical Society. I have a lot of their radio dramas. I didn't know they had a Christmas CD, though. I'll have to check that out. There's definitely something about Christmas and winter. As soon as it starts, there's certain things that I want to listen to and do outside of Christmas that are just sort of tangentially involved. Like, I want to draw fantasy characters. I want to watch Lord of the Rings. I want to listen to Led Zeppelin. It's like, it cues up all of these things that I do as soon as the season changes. Yeah, you can see I really changed how I had drawn that originally. Because I think if I would have stuck with vertical, I think it would have gone against the grain a little too much. Mine came with a Christmas tentacle instead of a stocking. That's classic. I finished up the research and I am starting the plotting for my Santa Claus comic, combining the historical St. Nicholas with the mess. That's like, sounds so much fun. What a visually cool character, and obviously iconic, but it's like there's so much to play with. It's almost like I love, I would say almost every single version of A Christmas Carol, because I love that story so much that even like the bad versions, or I don't know if there's really a bad versions of A Christmas Carol, but there's ones that I'm not a huge fan of, just because every take still has certain elements, and the core elements of A Christmas Carol are so universal and iconic that, you know, I love even the bad versions. Man, this guy is going to take quite a bit of time, but that's okay. I like the Ernest Christmas Carol. So, and I'm sure I mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. I had never seen a Muppets Christmas Carol. You know, I watched all the versions, and I'm going to blank on the actors' names, etc. But George C. Scott, and there's even one with Patrick Stewart, and you name it. There's actually quite a few like low budget ones. There was one with Guy Pearce recently, but I'd never seen a Muppet Christmas Carol. And one of my, I don't want to say problems with the Christmas Carol, but something that always in the back of my head just bothered me a little bit was Scrooge didn't sort of see the light or come to his senses, we'll say, until the third ghost in most of these versions. He wouldn't relent until he saw that he was dead and that nobody was mourning him. It seemed like definitely in the George C. Scott version, you know, virtually all of those, you know, even the animated one with Jim Carrey. Anyway, so I'm like, you know what, I need to read A Christmas Carol just to make sure that that's how it is. And it's not. In the book A Christmas Carol, Scrooge really sees where he went wrong and really has his redemption arc far earlier. Even the first ghost, you can tell he's like, you know, please forgive me. He's really seen the error of his ways. And the reason I really appreciated the Muppet Christmas Carol is because, who's the character? The famous English actor guy. Jeez. Anyway, he plays it more like the book. He really does seem to relent closer to the beginning. So I actually think that the Muppet Christmas Carol is, I would probably venture to say, in spirit, at least one of the closer versions of it. Michael Caine, yeah. Who, you know, you can't go wrong with Michael Caine, and but yeah, his actual portrayal, I think, is closer to the original material. But George C. Scott is such a great Scrooge. It's hard not to love that version. I always forget to give him his gnarly fingernails. The Magoo one razzleberry dressing. Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol. I didn't know there was a Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol. I'll definitely have to check that out. There's not a lot of people doing sort of traditional pen and ink drawings from start to finish. There's some. I follow them on Instagram. I mean, obviously you have Frank Cho that does some really amazing stuff with ballpoint. But I don't know. I feel like over the years it's definitely waned along with everything else. And I was mentioning last time that pen and ink is substantially easier than a brush. So I always feel like if people really want to get into illustration and comics, they should start with a pen and then move up to brush eventually if they want. So this is another area that's going to be really dark. Which will push his upper leg forward. One thing about pen and ink drawings is you really want to reserve white. It's hard to do, but you really, since there's going to be a lot of gray, you want to minimize the amount of white because that's really where the light will appear. So even sometimes when it feels like you've overworked it, as long as you've left some white in particular locations, it'll show that much more intense. Because if you think about, let's think about what, let me know when you get your package. Oh yeah, sure, John. John has a book called Heroic Tales, currently in demand on Fund My Comic. And I was very honored to be part of it. So, in a little way, there is a surprise image, we'll say, or a surprise appearance of Horace H. Hoover in his book. But it's a fun superhero book, sort of classic, so check it out. It's definitely not a cult mystery. So it's, although, I mean, I could see that maybe later on popping up, right, John? With other characters, other tales, maybe? This big hunk of leg here is gonna be tough. Well, not tough, but it's just gonna be something. So can't see that. Yes, HHH is an issue too also. Oh, that's right. Yes, sorry. I can't wait to see it in print. Yeah, it's kind of like there's a few times that your comic book character can come alive. And the first is when you see it, like you write a story and it's there and it's in print and it's really amazing. But then to see your character in another comic, in a quote unquote surprise appearance, it makes it like extra real. It's like another level, if that makes any sense. But you know, seeing it somewhere else, seeing your character, like it's the same kind of thing as seeing fan art, you know, of Horace H. Hoover. It just makes it, sorry, I trailed off there because I'm thinking how I want to handle this. Yeah, I definitely understand the appeal of like shared universes or expanding your universe. You know, I always think about my first comic it was a Hulk comic. I'm blanking on the number. Maybe 283 or something like that. I always forget what it is, but it was the Hulk and the Avengers show up. And at that time, that just blew my mind. And so anytime you see characters interact in any kind of way, or see them show up in a different universe or a different world, it just adds a whole other level. All right, so I'm going to have to, in order to keep this leg forward, I just have to make a conscious effort to darken this. So I have two things to do. I need to keep this really dark, and then this is a sort of mid-level dark, and then keep this pretty light to really show the separation between those areas. And honestly, sometimes you just have to keep that in mind as you're drawing, because you can focus on a particular area, and then you step back and you're like, oh crap, I forgot I was supposed to, you know, keep this light or keep this dark or something, and you've already overworked it and then it's done. And I suggest you have a drink or something. Hey, Coco Shuko Papashango, how's it going? Thanks for popping in again. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think this was pretty fun to do so far, at least. Just because I haven't done it in a while, so it's something to kind of get the cobwebs out of my brain. Now, I said I wasn't going to be cross-hatching. I might lie, because I think I might actually cross-hatch underneath. I have to think about it, though. So there's cross-hatching to essentially show value, like on a gradient scale. Like you have like a light gray, a dark gray, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's cross-hatching for texture. So, I mean, this is supposed to be cloth. I'm thinking like a burlap sack or something like that. You know, cross-hatching for texture for here might be okay. So I'm going to think about it a little bit before I dig into it. But I think I want to add some texture to this loincloth thing he's got going. So in order to do that, I might be doing some cross-hatching. And I think it would be okay if I kept it just to the loincloth too. I think if I added cross-hatching somewhere else, then once you add it one place, you really need to add it everywhere if it's used for shading. But like I said, for textures, I think that's probably a different thing, and I think I could get away with it. We'll see. Your nibbling is working really smoothly. Thanks, Marcus. I can't wait to see Renzo draw Wolf and Batsy, Horus, and I know that's short for something. I'm trying to think what that is. The Tonic Moles book, I think. Yeah, I love your smooth lines. I could never do that, as I have no talent nor patience. I mean, like, writing and coming up with superhero names is definitely outside of my purview, so sometimes I wish I could but write quickly. It takes me a long time, admittedly, so yeah. I'm definitely a little bit slower than other people. Alright, so I'm breaking my rule and I'm adding cross-hatching, hoping that it implies texture. And I think I'll be okay. Won't really know until the drawing is completely done, which isn't great, but them's is the breaks. There is a percentage of, you know, how far you get into a drawing, and you're like, okay, you know what, I've sort of passed the Rubicon as far as destroying the drawing, and because, you know, I've got 70% of the drawing done. So, you know, even if the next 30% isn't amazing, you know, that 70% will definitely override any mistakes I make. So I'm not there yet, but I feel pretty good that there's enough form, there's enough major shading, directions, you know, all of a lot of decisions have been made already. So again, I'm not saying I can't mess it up, but I'm getting to that point where it's harder to mess up because I've done so much already that works. Fly Fox Pro. Hola, how's it going? Thanks for popping in. I appreciate it. Shading versus texture, yeah. Yeah, and again, it's for things like that, you might not really know until the very end. But it's so interesting to hear the problems you find and solve on the page. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's constant, and I'm totally open with my thought process, just because I know everybody else goes through the same thing, and they might be a little less reticent for whatever reason. But it's a constant thing. I mean, virtually every mark on the page is going to be some sort of problem solving. I meant your nib is working well. Thank you. I thought that's what you meant, Marcus, but hey, I accepted it for what it was. All my shadows look like big black blobs on my drawing. Yeah, I guess it depends. You know, I generally, now this might not be a good example, but I do my shadows in stages. That way I can always go back and darken them. So some people would spot blacks, and we'll just use this as an example. They would say, okay, this is going to be solid black. This is going to be solid black under his chin. This is going to be solid black. And that's the first thing that they do. And then you get to the end of the drawing and you're like, oh man, I wish a little bit of light would be peeking through that shadow. So what I do is, you know, I start with dark and then slowly build it up. And in the end, excuse me, I might actually make them completely black, but there's no reason you can't just kind of build up to that. Comic books are different a little bit, but I err on the side of building up the blacks. And if you're on a time crunch, I get that too. I'm a noob wankster. The other thing, I haven't done it just yet. I'll wait till the end to show, but there's something you do in pen and ink where you can essentially, all right, well that is a mistake. That's unfortunate. That's what happens with pen and ink. That hurts. That hurts. Okay. The question is, I'm gonna have to think about this. That's gonna be hard. I can't go solid black on the side of the leg. I might have to try to use whiteout. Whiteout for pen and ink is so dicey. But I will wait till the end on that. How do you fix that? So there's a few ways to fix it. For traditional pen and ink, usually you would use illustration board. And on illustration board, sometimes you can actually take an X-Acto knife and scrape, but you can't, it's really hard to work back into it. You can try whiteout, but it's a lot harder with pen and ink because you have a sharp point. With a brush, you know, the brush will kind of lay on it, but that hurts. That's a bummer. I'm gonna be thinking about this today. Well, I'll leave it until the end. That's a bummer. Now see, why couldn't that have at minimum dropped here? It's like, if there's gonna be a giant drop of ink, why wouldn't, you know, why didn't it show up here? It's like butter only landing on the buttered side down. Darn it. All right. That's gonna be tough. That's gonna be tough. Well, can't let that rattle you. Because I still have another, 10,000 marks to make on the page. Hey, Easy Comic Reader, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Zhao, what ink are you using? Unfortunately, this is like the special Fabrizio ink. It's just a mixture of inks, and I wish I was so cool that I had like a recipe, but I just kind of eyeball it, which it's not the best idea in the world, but I kind of pick a few inks. Sometimes it's Speedball, sometimes it's Koh-i-Noor, sometimes it's Eon, whatever their ink is called. And then I usually have to kind of futz with it a bit. If it's too watery, then I'll just let it sit out and evaporate. If it's too thick, I'll add a little water. So once you get the consistency you're looking for, it's kind of easy, but I wish I could just say it's X kind of ink, but I kind of play around with stuff because I'm really picky with ink, and I never seem to find an ink out of the bottle that works for me. I wish I did. I have tried every ink 1,000 times. All right, so let's kind of look at it. Wow, okay, still can't see it. My controls are not responding. All right, so we have quite a bit like the midtones, really. And from here, it's kind of like when you squint your eyes and you see, where the lights are, where the highlights are. And I think I have a pretty good you know, you have light coming across here, hitting the head. The head casts a shadow on the bicep. But you still have this bright white over here. This really shows light hitting. On the top of the shoulder, for sure, that's a lot of light. And then as the arm comes down, it's a little more in shadow, the hand. These whites down here, like the white on the pec, that's a little, I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, and it might go dark. But what I'll do is I'll go dark here first, and then I'll go dark there instead of just making the whole thing gray. It'll really muddy it up as I'm building up the layers. So that might end up going gray in the end, but right now it's white. I'm going to keep this white here because we really want to show kind of light here, hitting the top of the leg on the knee, and then probably right here at the tip of this other leg. So I'm getting there. And then I'm really leaving the night for the very end. You know, it's like, I don't want to say he's the easy part, but he's the easy part. It's just, let me pull out the pencils. You know, he's kind of almost done in a way. Because I have his armor kind of loosely placed. I have the hand, the sword, you know, the cloak. So it's not going to be very difficult. So I like leaving that a little vague just because, you know, when I actually finish it, especially with pen and ink, I can get noodly in there, and that'll be just fun. You know, I can find some armor, some Spanish armor, and throw a little design. I can, you know, just do little tweaks, not tweaks, but little details that don't make him generic knight. Yeah, so I think I'm good for the day. Thanks everybody for popping in. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. Just doing fantasy pen and ink stuff. It's definitely a different feel, and it changes up my comic book stuff. Speaking of which, I am hopefully finishing up pencils for issue 4. It's taken a long time, but I've had other things I've been working on, some commissions, some resin models that I've, you know, sell on Etsy. So I have other things that I am working on. But Horus is just continuing to move forward, just a little longer than I would like. But I'm really loving it, so. And this is really shaking. So I'm okay at taking a little longer. It's the resolution. It really has to be really satisfying to read and to look at, so I would prefer to do that. I think that's it. I don't have anything else to announce, but as always, if you haven't checked out my book, Horace H. Hoover, Cult Detective, there's a collected 1 through 3 on Amazon. Issues 1 through 3 are on HoraceHoover.com. Cult Detective, sort of Lovecraftian adventure stuff. So it's not all ages, but it's not real dark. I don't think it is, at least. All right, I hope everybody has a good rest of their day on Sunday, and I will talk to everybody later. Thanks again. Bye.